Hey everyone, welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're diving deep, as the name suggests, into a really fascinating report that you sent over. And I got to say, I found it really interesting. We're going to be talking about the global market for intravascular ultrasound, or IVUS devices.
Right to be here.
So for anyone who might not be totally familiar, we're talking about those medical tools that allow doctors to basically see inside blood vessels,
Yeah.
especially in the heart, right?
Yeah, absolutely. IVUS is kind of like having a tiny camera inside a catheter, and it uses sound waves to create detailed images of the inside of blood vessels. It's super useful for diagnosing and treating cardiovascular diseases.
Cool. Now, this report is all about the market for those IVUS devices, and the big takeaway, I'd say, is pretty significant growth. By 2025, it's projected to hit USD 892.56 million globally. But then, by 2033, that number jumps way up to USD 1,359.45 million. That translates to a CGR, a compound annual growth rate, of 5.4%.
Exactly. That's a pretty impressive growth trajectory, and it really underscores the increasing importance of IVUS in the field of cardiology.
So what's driving this growth? What's pushing this market up?
Well, there are a couple of key factors at play. One is the unfortunate reality that cardiovascular diseases are becoming more and more prevalent worldwide. And as the number of people with heart problems rises, the need for advanced diagnostic and treatment tools like IVUS naturally follows.
Right, that makes sense.
The second big driver is the shift towards minimally invasive procedures in medicine. You know, patients and doctors alike are increasingly opting for less invasive treatments whenever possible because they often mean quicker recovery times, fewer complications, and a better overall experience. IVUS plays a crucial role in guiding and optimizing these minimally invasive procedures, making them safer and more effective.
Yeah, minimally invasive sounds good to me. Now, you mentioned globally, but this growth isn't going to be evenly spread, right? How does the
Mhm.
picture look geographically?
Absolutely. The market landscape varies quite a bit from region to region. Right now, North America is the front runner, holding the largest market share. In 2025, they're projected to have over 37% of the global market, which comes out to USD 330.25 million.
Wow, that's a huge chunk.
It is. But the most rapid growth is actually expected to be in the Asia-Pacific region, with a projected CGR of 8.2% over the next, well, almost decade, I guess, from 2025 to 2033. So while North America is leading right now, the Asia-Pacific market is catching up fast.
Interesting. And before we dive deeper into each region, what about the overall data and how this report is structured? It's always good to understand the context of the numbers, right?
Definitely. Just to give you a little background, the base year for all these projections is 2024. The report looks at historical data from 2021 to 2024 and then projects forward to 2033. This approach gives us a really good understanding of the market's past performance and helps us to make more reliable predictions about its future.
Okay, so solid historical grounding for the
Yeah.
projections.
Exactly. And this isn't just some quick overview. It's actually the eighth edition of this report, and the data was just updated in January of 2025. It's super thorough, over 250 pages of in-depth analysis. They even provide all the raw data in Excel and presentation-ready slides, so it's easy to dig into the details if you want.
Sounds comprehensive. So let's start with North America, the current king of the IVUS market.
Right. So we mentioned that they're expected to hold over 37% of the global market in 2025, with a total market value of, let me just double check here. Yeah, USD 330.25 million. But their projected KGR from 2025 to 2033 is a bit more modest, sitting at 4.2%.
Okay, so slower growth than some other engines, but still growth.
Definitely. And within North America, the U.S. is by far the biggest player, with projected market size of USD 260.57 million in 2025, growing at about 4.0%. Canada is estimated at USD 39.63 million, with the KGR of 5.0%. And Mexico is projected to be at USD 30.05 million, with a 4.7% CDR.
Got it. So why is North America such a strong market for IVUS devices?
Well, a lot of it comes down to the high prevalence of cardiovascular diseases. In fact, the American Heart Association estimates that almost 805,000 Americans have a heart attack every single year. That's a staggering number, and it creates a huge demand for advanced diagnostic and treatment options like IVUS.
Yeah, those numbers are pretty scary.
Definitely. But on the positive side, North America has a really well-developed healthcare infrastructure, advanced reimbursement policies that often cover procedures using IVUS, and a strong presence of major medical device companies. All of these factors contribute to a really favorable market environment for IVUS technology.
Makes sense. So moving on to Europe, what's the situation like over there?
Europe's the second largest market for IVUS devices, representing over 29% of global revenue in 2025, with a market size of USD 258.84 million. Their projected CGR, similar to North America, is also 4.2% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so pretty comparable to North America in terms of growth.
Yeah, it's interesting though because the European market is a bit more fragmented, with significant variations between individual countries. For example, the UK's market is estimated at USD 43.49 million, growing at 5.0%. Germany's a bit bigger at USD 51.25 million, with a slightly faster growth rate of 5.5%. And then you have France at USD 23.81 million, growing at 3.4%, and Italy at USD 22.26 million with a 3.6% CAGR.
So a lot of diversity within Europe.
Exactly. And we can't forget about Russia, which is a significant market at USD 42.44 million, growing at 3.2%, followed by Spain at USD 21.23 million and a CAGR of 3.3%. Then you have several smaller markets like Sweden, Denmark, Switzerland, and Luxembourg that all contribute to the overall picture.
It sounds like a dynamic market with a lot of moving pieces. What are the key factors driving the European market overall?
Well, one of the big things is the constant innovation happening in IVUS technology. We're seeing things like real-time 3D intravascular imaging, the use of artificial intelligence to help with image analysis, and improvements in the design and flexibility of the catheters themselves.
So technology is playing a big role.
Definitely. And the regulatory environment in Europe is really supportive of these advancements. Bodies like the European Medicines Agency, EMA, and the CE marking process make it relatively easy to get approval for new medical technologies, which definitely helps with adoption.
Interesting. Any other factors worth mentioning?
Yeah, two more, I'd say. There's a big push towards healthcare digitalization across Europe right now, and that's driving the adoption of technologies like IVUS, which can seamlessly integrate into digital systems. And then there's the growing focus on precision medicine, which aims to tailor treatments to individual patients. IVUS provides really detailed diagnostic information that's perfect for guiding personalized treatment decisions.
Okay, that all makes sense. So let's shift gears now and talk about the Asia-Pacific region, the one poised for the most explosive growth.
Right. So APAC currently holds about 25% of the global IVUS market, with a size of USD 214.21 million in 2025. But the really exciting part is that projected CAGR of 8.2% from 2025 to 2033. That's a really strong indicator of a booming market.
Yeah, that's a serious growth rate.
Absolutely. And when you break it down by country, it gets even more interesting. China is obviously a major player, with a market size of USD 89.97 million and a KGR of 7.7%. Then you have Japan at USD 29.56 million, growing at 6.7%, and South Korea at USD 25.71 million with a KGR of 7.3%. But the real star of the show is India.
India.
Yep, India. They're projected to have the highest national growth rate at a whopping 10.1%, with a market size of USD 21.42 million in 2025. So they're definitely a market to watch.
Wow, 10.1%, that's huge.
Yeah.
What's driving that kind of growth in India and the Asia-Pacific region as a whole?
Well, several things are happening at once. First off, the prevalence of cardiovascular diseases is on the rise in the region, partly due to aging populations and lifestyle changes, like increasing rates of obesity and diabetes.
So similar to what we're seeing in other parts of the world.
Exactly. But on top of that, many governments in the Asia-Pacific are increasing their healthcare budgets, which means more money for expanding cardiac centers and providing access to advanced technologies like IVUS. And there's also a growing acceptance of minimally invasive procedures in the region, with more patients and doctors recognizing their benefits. Plus, just the sheer size and growth rate of the population in many of these countries contributes to a massive market potential.
Right, it's a region ripe for growth.
Yeah.
So moving on, what about South America? What's happening down there?
South America is a smaller market compared to North America, Europe, or Asia Pacific, but it's still significant. They hold over 3.8% of the global market share in 2025. There's actually a slight discrepancy in the report here. It initially mentions a market size of USD 33.92 million for South America in 2025, but later on, a more detailed regional breakdown gives a figure of USD 53.0 million. Given the more granular analysis, the USD 53.0 million seems more accurate. Anyway, they're projected to grow at a CAGR of 5.7% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so not as big as the other regions we've talked about, but still a decent amount of growth.
Exactly. And within South America, Brazil's the biggest market, estimated at USD 14.52 million with a 6.3% CAGR. Then you have Argentina at USD 5.70 million and a CAGR of 6.6%. Colombia at USD 3.02 million, growing at 5.5%, and Peru and Chile with similar figures and growth rates.
So what's driving the IVUS market in South America?
One big factor is the increased accessibility of minimally invasive procedures, especially in countries like Brazil and Argentina, where the healthcare infrastructure is constantly improving. There's also a growing awareness of the advantages of advanced diagnostic technologies like IVUS, and we're seeing more partnerships between local healthcare providers and international medical device companies, which is helping to bring these technologies to the region.
Got it. Now let's move on to the Middle East. What's the market looking like there?
So, the Middle East represents about 4.0% of the global market in 2025, with a market size of USD 35.70 million and a projected CGR of 5.9% from 2025 to 2033. Saudi Arabia is the largest market in the region, estimated at USD 12.57 million and growing at 6.2%. Then comes the UAE at USD 7.35 million with a 6.4% CGR. Turkey, Qatar, and Egypt are other significant markets in the region.
Interesting. So what's behind the growth in the Middle East?
It's largely driven by the massive investments in healthcare infrastructure by governments across the region. Initiatives like Saudi Vision 2030 and the UAE's national health strategies are really pushing for improvements in cardiovascular care, which means more money is being poured into building advanced medical facilities and adopting technologies like IVUS.
So government investment is playing a big role.
Absolutely. And another factor is the increasing prevalence of lifestyle-related risk factors for cardiovascular diseases such as diabetes and obesity in the Middle Eastern population. This is unfortunately leading to a higher demand for diagnostic and treatment tools like IVUS.
Makes sense. Now, finally, let's talk about Africa. What's the IVUS market landscape like there?
Right. So Africa is currently the smallest IVUS market, only representing about 2.20% of global revenue in 2025, with a market size of USD 19.64 million. However, they're still projected to grow at a CAGR of 5.1% from 2025 to 2033.
Okay, so smaller market, but still growth.
Yep, definitely growth. South Africa is the largest market on the continent with a size of USD 6.91 million and a CAGR of 6.0%. Nigeria comes next at USD 1.57 million and a CAGR of 5.3%.
So what's driving the market in Africa, even though it's starting from a smaller base?
Well, awareness of cardiovascular diseases is increasing across the continent, and governments are starting to implement initiatives aimed at improving early detection and treatment capabilities. There are still challenges, of course, like limited healthcare infrastructure and affordability issues in some regions.
Right, those are significant hurdles.
They are. But there's definitely progress being made, often with the help of international organizations that are providing support to develop healthcare systems in Africa. As things improve, we're seeing a gradual increase in the adoption of IVUS technology, particularly in more developed urban areas.
That's good to hear. So we've covered the market from a regional perspective, but the report also dives into different segments of the market, right?
Yes, it segments the market by product type, application, and end user.
Let's start with product type. What are the different types of IVUS devices out there?
The main product categories are IVUS catheters and IVUS imaging systems. IVUS catheters are those thin, flexible tubes that are inserted into the blood vessel and contain the tiny ultrasound transducer that captures the images. And then the imaging system is the console that processes and displays the images.
Okay, so those are the two main categories. Which one is dominating the market?
IVUS catheters are by far the dominant segment, and they're expected to remain that way. They're essential for both coronary and peripheral imaging because they're the ones that actually go inside the blood vessels and capture the images.
Makes sense.
And the interesting thing is that IVUS catheters are also predicted to be the fastest growing product segment. That's because of the continuous advancements in catheter design, transducer technology, and image resolution, as well as the increasing demand for minimally invasive diagnostic procedures.
Got it. So catheters are king, and they're only getting better. What about the different ways IVUS devices are being used? What are the main applications?
Well, the main applications are coronary intervention and non-coronary or peripheral intervention. Coronary intervention refers to procedures performed on the blood vessels that supply the heart. This is where IVUS is most commonly used right now, mainly because of the increasing number of percutaneous coronary interventions, or PCIs, being performed globally.
What's a PCI exactly?
It's basically a minimally invasive procedure used to open up blocked arteries in the heart. They use a balloon to widen the narrowed artery and often insert a stent to keep it open. And IVUS is super helpful during these procedures because it allows the doctor to see the blockage in detail and make sure the stent is placed perfectly.
Okay, that makes sense. So what about the non-coronary or peripheral interventions?
That refers to procedures performed on blood vessels outside the heart. For example, IVUS can be used to diagnose and treat peripheral artery disease, or PADI, which affects blood flow in the arteries of the legs and feet. It can also be used in interventions on blood vessels in the kidneys, neck, and other areas. This segment of the market is actually growing really fast, fueled by the increasing prevalence of PADI and the recognition that IVUS can be incredibly useful in these peripheral interventions.
Got it. So coronary intervention is the bigger application right now, but peripheral interventions are catching up. What about the end users? Who's actually using these IDUS devices?
Right. The main end users are hospitals and ambulatory surgical centers, or ASCs. Hospitals currently hold the largest market share, which is no surprise given that they handle a large volume of patients, have access to advanced medical equipment, and employ specialized cardiologists and vascular surgeons who are trained to use IVUS.
Right. It makes sense that hospitals would be the primary users.
But ASCs are actually the fastest growing end user segment. That's because more and more minimally invasive procedures are being performed in outpatient settings like ASCs. These centers are often more cost effective than hospitals and offer shorter recovery times for patients, which makes them really appealing.
Yeah, I can see why ASCs would be gaining popularity. So looking at the bigger picture, what are the main drivers behind the growth of the IVUS devices market overall?
Well, we've already touched on some of them. The increasing prevalence of cardiovascular diseases worldwide is a huge factor. Then there's the shift towards minimally invasive procedures, which is driving demand for technologies that can guide and enhance these procedures, like IVUS.
And of course, the technology itself is constantly improving.
Exactly. Continuous advancements in IVUS technology, making the devices more accurate, easier to use, and capable of providing higher resolution images, are a major driver of market growth.
Are there any factors that might be holding the market back or creating challenges?
There are a couple. One is the cost. IVUS devices can be expensive, especially for hospitals and clinics in regions with limited healthcare budgets. And then there's the availability of alternative imaging modalities, like traditional angiography and optical coherence tomography, OCT. These technologies can sometimes compete with IVUS in certain applications, but it really depends on the specific situation.
Right, so cost and competition from other technologies. What about emerging trends? What new things are happening in the world of IVUS?
Two trends are really worth mentioning. The first is the growing focus on personalized medicine. As healthcare moves towards tailoring treatments to the unique needs of each patient, IVUS becomes even more valuable because it provides such detailed information about the individual's blood vessels and any blockages.
Makes sense. Tailored treatment needs tailored information.
Exactly. And the second trend is the increasing integration of IVUS with other imaging technologies. We're seeing more and more hybrid imaging systems that combine the strengths of IVUS with other modalities like OCT or angiography. This allows doctors to get a much more complete and accurate picture of what's going on inside the patient's blood vessels.
That's fascinating. So who are the big players in this market? Who are the companies leading the charge in IVUS technology?
It's a pretty competitive market with a mix of big international companies and smaller, more specialized players.
Yeah.
Some of the key names you'll see in this report include Canon Medical Systems, Boston Scientific, GE Healthcare, Philips, Siemens Healthcare, Hitachi, Mindray Medical International, Fujifilm, Samsung Medicine, and Chissen Medical Technologies. These companies are all heavily involved in developing and manufacturing IVUS devices.
So a mix of familiar names and maybe some newer companies too.
Right. And they're all constantly innovating, coming up with new features and applications for IVUS technology.
The report also mentions a recent partnership. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, in May of 2024, Sonovascular, a company focused on developing ultrasound-based technologies, announced a collaboration with Lantheus Holdings. The goal of this partnership is to combine Sonovascular's sonothrombectomy system with Lantheus's microbubble technology. They're basically working on a new way to treat venous thromboembolism, which is when blood clots form in the veins.
Wow, that's really interesting. So they're using IVUS technology to treat blood clots now.
Well, not exactly IVUS itself, but a related ultrasound-based technology. It shows how these technologies are being explored for new applications beyond their traditional use in cardiology.
That's really cool. So to wrap things up, what are the key takeaways for listeners who've been following our deep dive into the IVUS devices market?
Well, the main message is that the global market for IVUS devices is expected to experience significant growth over the next decade. This growth is primarily driven by the increasing prevalence of cardiovascular diseases worldwide and the continued shift towards minimally invasive medical procedures.
And it sounds like the Asia-Pacific region is the one to watch, with the fastest projected growth rate.
Absolutely, but there's growth happening everywhere. We also talked about the different segments of the market, with IVUS catheters dominating the product landscape and peripheral interventions emerging as a major application alongside coronary interventions. And of course, the ongoing technological advancements and strategic partnerships in the industry are creating exciting new possibilities for the future of IVUS technology.
This has been a really insightful discussion. Thanks so much for breaking down this complex topic for us.
It's been my pleasure.
And for our listeners, here's a final thought to ponder. Given the increasing focus on preventive cardiology and the continuous development of new non-invasive imaging techniques, how do you think the role of IVUS will evolve in the future? It's a question worth considering as medical technology continues to advance at an incredible pace. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll see you next time.